All right, good evening. Thank you for coming. I'm Philip, lead librarian for this branch, North Muskegon and the Laketon Township branch. And you are here for Richard Mullally's presentation on North Muskegon veterans. You may have received this in the mail, the Friends newsletter. If you haven't, we've got copies up here, so please grab one of those. We've got plenty more history programs coming this summer, this season. The Muskegon Railroad Historical Society will be in the Sweet Valley Railroads in the county. Amber Chaffee of Military History 101 will be back to speak on the Hindenburg disaster and dirigible airships. Senior Gentle Yoga in the Park just kicked off today. If you're interested in that, check that out in the newsletter. You can sign up for that. The West Michigan Underwater Preserve will be back to speak about shipwrecks in Lake Michigan again. We have a Genetics and You program if you've been interested in do-it-yourself at-home genetic testing. Spin the tube, send it in. If you want to know more about that, you can check that out. And we have a program by Compassionate Choices coming up on the state of end-of-life options in Michigan. I am introducing Richard Mullally. He is here. He is the North Muskegon class of 1963. He's a retired teacher. He's been working on the Veteran Project since 2009. He's amassed about 14,000 pictures. In this presentation, you'll probably recognize teachers, neighbors, and other community members. He'll take questions at the end, so save your questions if you can to the end. And just so you know, since COVID, he has not shaken hands, nothing personal, just so you know. Tonight's program is being recorded here. No one seated is pictured within the video, so you know. So you're not included in it, if you're wondering. But some who were not able to make it have requests to be recorded, so we can record you tonight. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'll hand it off to Richard. Thank you for coming. One more super quick thing. Tonight's program is supported by the Friends of the Walker Memorial Library. They brought refreshments if you haven't hit the table yet. It is a free program as usual, but if you would like to donate, there's a bucket by the door. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Phil, and thank you all for showing up. I can guarantee that you will see and hear names up on the screen that you've heard before. Especially if you went to North Muskegon High School, most of your teachers will be up there. I have to thank my mother for getting this started. When I was just a little kid, I realized Mom was a saver. But she saved important stuff like photographs, and she wrote the names of the people on the back. So I started as a kid to realize that many of my relatives were in the war. Well, I didn't even know there had been a war. But as I started to realize it, my cousins, my uncle, the people who married into my family had served in World War II, and I had pictures of all of them, thanks to my mom. So in '09, I thought, I'd better give a little tribute to each one of the people in my family. And when I got done with that, I thought, well, what am I going to do now? And then I thought, well, what about my high school teachers? They were in the war. What about my barber? What about my friends from Laketon Bethel Church? So now after all these years, I am not done. That's why I put that little notice on your chair, because I haven't gotten around to all of them. I'm turning 79 today, and I'm hoping I have a few more years so I can continue giving honor to the people, the men and women who have served our country all the way up till now. My collections go from the Revolutionary War all the way up to the present situation. If you contact me I won't call you. I won't call anybody. Remember when you used to be able to call people on the phone and they would answer the phone? Doesn't happen anymore. So if somebody calls me, I will take care of your families, the veterans. I have a strong connection with North Muskegon High School. They could call me the class historian, but I have been called the class undertaker, because I keep track of, as we lose them, I keep track and say, well, we won't have to invite her anymore to the reunions. So eventually we'll all be gone, but at least many of my classmates are now honored in a special way, and you'll see them on the screen. What you see on the screen right now is right out in the hall. Some of you can see it. At the time of the war, and I'm talking about World War II, they made that plaque with all those brass plaque names of people from North Muskegon High School who graduated in the first half of the 1940s. So they were a list that I followed through and have contacted either the family or just a newspaper clipping about that person, and you'll see them here today. I want to save any questions for the end because otherwise we'll never finish. Achterhoff, Clarence Achterhoff, North Muskegon person, and I know some of you have known people in the Achterhoff family. There's his brother Jay, who served in Alaska. Now, what was he doing in Alaska? Well, the war was going on there. This man never came back. He died in the war, and we had in Muskegon County 432 men who never came home from World War II, which is unbelievable when you consider it was going on all over the world, and we have pictures in the museum, the LST, of 429 of them, so we're only missing 3. And those pictures are on permanent display, including the ones from the North Muskegon area. That's his nephew, Hans, who is still living. He served during the Vietnam era. Steve Allen, some of you may be knowing him. He's a current person, but a Vietnam veteran from the Air Force. Now, I'm only going to mention the names, and think especially of the last name, because your last name may be appearing on the screen. George Anneker, I met with him a number of times when he lived at home in North Muskegon and when he went to the nursing home. And I told him, George, you should have gone in the movies instead of going into the war. And Laketon Bethel Reformed Church. I never thought of Milo in that way until I found out, and I sat down with him and found out that he was in the Army Air Corps, which now we call the Air Force. There's a street right off my Auble Road called Arnoldi, and named after this family. And he was one of my neighbors since I was growing up. Most of the people you see here are no longer with us. Aschendorf, I met Jake on Mills Avenue. What an interesting character. He was part of a Jewish family of 4 brothers who all were in the war, but he was the one who lived in this area. Asmussen, and there are several here. This is the sister. Her maiden name was Auble. I live on Auble Road. We have a lot of roads named after prominent or maybe not so prominent people in the past. And here's, I knew Anita. I never met Robert, he was gone. But Anita lived right here in North Muskegon, and she was quite an activist and interesting person. This was number 1 for me. This man was married to my cousin, and he was the first one I interviewed, and he was proud to say and show me that he could wear his uniform. You know, after all those years. And I continued running into him in the nursing home eventually. Now this man is living in North Muskegon right now, Larry Austin. He had an office supply store, and he was in the Army during the Vietnam era. I don't know if he's here tonight. If anybody sees their own picture on a screen, raise your hand, because there are few and far between. And that's another Austin. The man who is sitting down right now, you recognize her, don't you?
Yes, I do.
Yes, that's Ruth Baker, who was in the Wilson family, and she's your aunt. One of the not handsome but beautiful young ladies who served in the war. This man just died recently. Some of you knew Tom Austin, and his family provided that, or Tom Baker, provided that picture for me. He was a Vietnam veteran, a very well-known and respected North Muskegon High School graduate. Here's a lady I never met, but there's another road, Simonelli. We all been around that. Here's a man I never met, but I talked to on the phone, and we made an appointment. And I was going to meet him at his home at Circle Drive next week, and he died. So I went to visit his widow, and she provided the picture and told me that he was a pilot in the Marines. Here's, I have a classmate from North Muskegon, class of '63. I've got 5 of his family here. His brother Ernest, his brother Floyd, his brother Joe Bates. I just got to tell you about Joe. Joe was in the special services with the USO and the entertainers. And he told me that he was on a mission to deliver Dinah Shore in the Jeep to the next place where the show was going to be. And he heard a sound up in the air that he recognized as an incoming artillery shell. He jammed on the brakes, he threw her in the ditch, and he jumped on top of her like that. She got out full of mud, and Joe said, "I never thought a woman could swear so much." You remember Dinah Shore, but not in that way. That's one of those funny stories you can tell. And there's my friend's sister, who was a wave. Anybody know what waves means? Women accepted for voluntary emergency service. Here's Ray Batten. He's on that list out in the hall. He was a North Muskegon graduate. Here's another fellow I said, you should have gone into the movie industry. Some of these people were so handsome. I met them when that was way in the past. David Badal, father and mother of my classmate from class of '63. Bob Bedgood lost an eye in the Korean War, and he was also a member of our Lakeland Bethel Church. And you'll know when we're getting near the end. We're just in the B's now, but when they start becoming like X and Y and Z, you'll know that we're ending up. This is a father of one of my classmates, and here he is. This is Rodney Beecham, graduated with me in '63, and he's passed away. I never got a good picture of him, but he was in the newspaper, so that's what I used. A couple of Beagle brothers from Dalton, Milton. Milton ended up with an arm that was useless for the rest of his life because of a wound that he got. These people, some of them carried the after effects of the war with them all the time. I met this man, I think it's on Oak Avenue in North Muskegon, many times, and his wife. Now we've got a bunch of people. Sometimes the family had a whole group of men who went in. I knew Chuck Bellinger my whole life until he died just a couple years ago. His brother George, his brother Peter, Brother Philip. I never met any of these. They were already passed away. And his brother Stephen. So sometimes an entire family can be honored. And families have helped me so much because the remaining people sometimes have pictures of each one of their family members. Dorwin Bennett, I don't know very much about him except that he's on the list out in the hall. This is a man I meet once in a while over at the Moon. We call it the Moon, of course, it's the Full Moon Saloon. And this is a relative of some friends that I've met there. Carol Borman, I knew him. I was a deacon, he was a deacon at Laketon Bethel Church, but I didn't know this about him until somebody gave me his information. Leonard Boersma was our TV repairman, but I had no idea as a kid that he had been in the war in Europe. Here's a man I will be seeing on Friday, Norm Bovey. He served during the Korean War, and he was a Korean War veteran. And he's had a lot to tell me. He told me especially about the toilet facilities in Korea 70 years ago. I'll just let you imagine that. Richard Bourdon, I've got about 4 of the Bourdon brothers, but this is the one who lived in the area, and I discovered him just by seeing his license plate. It said World War II veteran. I had no idea who he was, but when I knocked on his door, he was very gracious and we had a great meeting. Donald Bowen belonged on that famous, very famous football team from 1941 and 42 in North Muskegon. How many of you have heard of it? They were never beaten. And in 41, they were never scored upon. They're in the Muskegon Area Sports Hall of Fame. I never got a good picture of Don Bowen, but at least I have that, and he was one of those members. I don't know much about him except his name was on the list, and I have all the North Muskegon High School annuals from 40 on up. And you should just see them. You look at any one of those, and you might remember FDR said, this generation of Americans has a rendezvous with destiny. You look through all those young men, 17, 18 years old, almost all of them went into the service. Yeah. Fortunately, most of them came home, but some of them didn't. This man lived on Bolton. I met him. I know his son very well. And then there was a group called the Fighting Broners. Francis Broner, James K. Broner, he lost a leg, and I talked to him on the phone. Sometimes you just can't go around the country talking to people. So I got him on the phone, and at first he didn't want to talk, but then I talked him into it, and he was one of those people in the Broner family. They called them the Fighting Broners. Robert Broner, Russell, who was a captain, and their brother who never came home. He was in the famous Red Arrow Division, and we call that the 32nd Infantry Division. And the picture came from somebody in the family because they all cooperated to try to give some honor to those people who are all gone, of course, now. I just talked with his boy yesterday. I said, your dad's picture smoking the pipe is going to be up on the screen. And Eddie, the son, has told me a lot about his dad. There are stories, everybody has stories. There are stories for every one of these people, and I consider myself so lucky to have actually met many of these people, and they told me about what they did and where they were. There's another Brown from Muskegon. This is the father of a friend, Coincidentally, both his daughter, Pam Brown, and Pam's husband have both passed away, but he was a member of our church also. And another member of our church in our neighborhood. I used the church directories carefully, going through and then contacting the people I knew, and got a tremendous amount of help from people. Now here's a picture. Bob, where are you? This is Bob's brother. Bob gave me this wonderful picture of his deceased brother from North Muskegon High School, but just the picture. It took several months until all of a sudden the information came and I could give him a proper caption, because otherwise it would have been just the name. And there's Bob sitting right over there, USA. And there's Bob's father, Thurl. Interesting first name. He served in the Army Air Corps. Here's a man I met in the nursing home. I never heard of him before. I just saw his name on the door, and I walked in and I said, like I've said thousands of times, "Are you a World War II veteran?" And quite often they say yes. Well, he was blind, but he started talking about my relatives, and he knew my family, and so we had a lot to talk about. And one thing is, you notice his helmet? It looks a little strange, doesn't it? It's a World War I helmet. Because when we got into the war, we didn't have any new equipment. So they just used what they had, World War I helmets. There's my principal from North Muskegon High School. Anybody remember him, Art Boltman? He's the one who called me to the office because I had had a Playboy magazine in the chemistry class. Now, you don't want me to show this to your mother, do you? Wesley Bunks, shop teacher, a real nice fellow. After he passed away, they were cleaning the house out, they found a live grenade. They had to call the officials there so that they could safely remove that. Another member of our church, I didn't know him, but I certainly knew of him. Here's a man that I'll see on Friday, Ned Burdick. He's a regular member of the Romeos. You've heard of them? The retired old men eating out. Robert Burns, he's the father of one of my high school classmates, Bobby, and I got the picture from her. Here's a man who lives in, I'm not sure, but he married a high school classmate of mine, Mike Burrows. I think it was about the class of 61 or 2, and he sent me his picture. He was on the school board, North Muskegon School Board, for 7 years, and he was the president of the school board for 4 years. Maybe some of you knew him in that way. That would be after, he's about 82 right now, but these people are all preserved young and handsome. I don't know much at all about him except his name is on the list. Okay, the Buys brothers. They call them the Fighting Broners. Well, the 6 Buys brothers all went into the war. Now, how many of you have ever heard of anybody named Buys? Oh, yeah, Buys Road. Well, I never met Norm. He had already died. But I certainly met his brother Leon. Boy, what a talker. I learned so much from him about a lot of things. And Phil Buys. Phil Buys had lost his eyesight too, but we had good times talking. Russ Buys, what a man. What memories I have of him. And I learned a few new words from him too. If you knew Russ Buys, you know what I'm talking about. And William Buys, another one who had passed away. So we have at least a picture of each of those people. Norm Campbell, my neighbor in North Muskegon on Oakmere. George Cannon, the Cannon family. The family lived on Circle Drive in North Muskegon. You've heard, of course, of Campbell, Wyatt, and Cannon.
Yeah.
Here's another fellow from our breakfast group, Vern Carlson, in Vietnam. And I said, which picture should I use? And I said, well, the one on the left is good, but showing him on the job with his pet, that was good too. Can't see much of my former neighbor and member of our church, Maury Carroll. This lady is my cousin, but I never met her. She passed away at a relatively young age, but her father I see every Friday, Paul Carson, and he was good enough to give me a picture of his daughter in uniform. Fred Chalker, again, he's on the list out in the hall. Jerry Champagne, I remember him from school, but really didn't know him. Even though we were a small school, you couldn't possibly know everybody. Charles Christian, his son, Dennis Christian, is a member of our group. We, class of '63, we're all about the same age, and we meet once a month, and we always wonder who's not going to show up. Oops. Okay, I met this man several times, and like so many, he's losing his memory, but there are certain things they never forget. Hyle Claflin is the father of two of my classmates, Gene and Jim Claflin from the class of '63, and I met him before he passed away too. William Clark lives not too far from me, and he paid a high price. He lost both legs over in Vietnam. And Harold Close, well-known attorney in North Muskegon. I bet you never saw these people in uniform before. That's what I always tried to focus on. Alan Cole, I've met him only once, and we didn't really have time to talk, but at least I have that information from the article. North Muskegon graduate. Here's my next door neighbor as a small child growing up, and I met him in his later years and learned about his service in the Navy. The Cordine family. Again, you've got four brothers, George, and Jim Cordine and his wife, and I didn't meet him, but I met her as an elderly lady, and she said, we were stationed at Alamogordo Air Base in New Mexico. And I said, did you hear a funny sound one morning, July 16, 1945? The first atomic bomb ever was tested very close to them. And she said, we both sat right up, and my husband said, Jesus Christ, what was that? Of course, the news was, it was an explosion of a fuel dome. They wouldn't dare tell them that an atomic bomb had gone off. And there's a brother, Joe, who was also in the war. And Peter. The only one I met was George. And I always could recognize George if I ran into him in the store. He had his finger missing because he played with a dynamite cap when he was a, oh, George! The daughter of Edwin Cowles, who flew 55 missions as a pilot, she's not doing well. I informed her of this, but I didn't expect that she'd show up now. You see, the children of the veterans are passing away too. It's not just the veterans themselves. And that's a relative, I think that was the brother, and I knew the daughter of Jim. Here's another fellow from our breakfast group. He didn't want to turn his picture in because he said, I look like a kid. Well, they all looked like a kid, but at least they were handsome. Here's one of my high school classmates, class of '63. Not a great picture, but he was glad to share that with me. I met Bill Dam on Memorial Drive shortly before he passed away, and was able to get information. His son lives next door to me now, so we have that in common. Ernie Daytrees, his daughter was in the class of '66, and I met his wife and got to know her a little bit, and she's the one who provided a picture of her husband. Ed Davis, met him several times, and he, like so many of them, he eventually in decline passed away. So my World War II veteran project is pretty well done. But when you read that notice I gave you, I'm expanding. George Davis, beautiful picture. You could read a whole story about his military career just from that picture. This is the father of my high school classmate, Mike Dean. And this is his uncle. You remember the man who started the North Shore Hardware?
Yeah.
Well, the Dean family is still there today. And he's reading a book called You Can't Do Business with Hitler. Well, that's for sure. Now we've got a number of people you can't do business with. Robert Dieter, another member of our church. Rick DeBryan, I think class of '64, North Muskegon. And some of these pictures I didn't get from the family because I don't have any contact with them, so when you're in the paper, I've got you. And Ike DeJager, a member of our church, I never knew him, he was gone already at the time. I surely knew Don D. Kuiper. He was one of my next door neighbors and role models as I grew up. And he, when I visited with him, he showed me a couple of really interesting artifacts. He had a German Luger, which was probably worth a few $1,000s, and he had Japanese swords too. George Dellinger. He's the father of one of our people from Lake and Bethel Church. Gerald DeLong. Ron, you know him. He's gone, but he's in that family. And in case you didn't look these pictures over very carefully, before you leave, make sure you take any pictures of people that you know, because they're just going to go back in the shoebox. They're in the museum. They're owned by the museum. But I can't get around to everybody to give these pictures back to the families. So if you can deliver any pictures up here to the right family, that's fine. Hank DeLong, again, a member of our church. There's Paul DeLong. I met his son. And Robert DeLong. There's a lot of Dutch people in the war. Did you notice? This is my cousin, Ernie Dennison. He told me a lot. I must have met with him 50 times through the years. What a wonderful man. I didn't know his brother very well, Leroy, but they were both in at the same time. Here's the greatest storyteller of all. I've met Joe many times over at Mr. Quick, and he never ran out of stories to tell, and some of you may have known that too. We took it with a grain of salt. Now here's a couple, Charlotte Downing and her husband Ted Downing. They lived just off Rudderman. I visited with them a few times, and she didn't want anything to do with it. She said, I didn't do anything. Well, yes you did. You were in the cadet nurse program, and that's part of the war. So they both they're gone now, of course. Here's another fellow I'm going to meet, Jeff Drum. He's never at a loss for words. I've heard so much and learned so much from him. I'll see him Friday morning. Here's my cousin I never knew. He was only 39 when he died. That's probably why I never met him. And he was a prisoner of the French. Did you know that some of the French were our enemies? And he was lucky to get out of that, and he survived the war. Harold Dollier, he was in both wars, but he never came back from the Korean War. Served in World War II, died in the Korean War. His brother, one of the last people from that dream team from North Muskegon football, I met him right near the end when I think he was the last one to die. So he had that in his memory, that memory of being on that famous team, and also being in the war. And unfortunately, he lost his son in Vietnam. So they had 2 deaths in their family from the war. You see so many tragic stories here. This is another brother in that same family. This man from North Muskegon, really, some of these older people are so interesting to talk to. I mean, they're retired and they've got lots of time to tell you what they know or what they think. And I enjoyed every time I met with Nick. John Ekman, member of our church, you can see right on his t-shirt that he was in the Army Air Corps, which now is the Air Force. Ken Eggert, I met him by accident at Mr. Quick. He was sitting in a booth all by himself, an older man, so I asked the inevitable question, oh yes. So I sat down and he told me a lot, some of which I won't repeat. Oh, we had such a good time with Dale Elliott. He was with Curve Crest in the earlier days, and he was a roller skate dancer. Now, I don't really understand that, but he told me they went all around the country performing. Merwin Erickson was a member of our church and also lived just a few doors away from me on Alba Road. The Icestone family. Almost everybody had an Icestone in their class, either cousin or brother or someone. Oliver Icestone lost his life in the war. He was a North Muskegon graduate, and the picture I'm using shows him by his aircraft, and it was a tragic thing, of course. But here he is in 1937, years before, all the way on the end. He was on the 37 North Muskegon High School baseball team, and it was coached by Lyle McNitt. Anybody ever heard of him? Oh yes, yes. Lyle McNitt, unforgettable. Here is that 1941 team that never lost a game and were never scored upon. Probably that will never happen again. And here's Lyle McNitt over on the right. Many of the pictures you see are pictures of these men who are gone now, but they're remembered in the Hall of Fame and they're remembered in the museum. Jim Fagan, his daughter, is the cheese lady, and she gave me his picture from the Navy. William Farwig, I've met him a few times here in North Muskegon. Donald Fauble, the father of one of my high school classmates and member of the church. And his wife Donna was good friends of my mother. There's so many connections. My high school classmate Eric Felt was in the Army, but I don't know much about him. And his brother Lynn was all in the Army Air Corps. Bob Fenner was on that famous football team, but I never met him. I talked to him once. He lived in Fremont, but somehow we couldn't get together, but at least I had his picture. Fenner Road. A lot of our roads are named after certain people. Joe Farrell and Clark Farrell, Howard Farrell. Those are all in the same family. Again, sometimes the whole family would be involved. In fact, I've heard people say it was a shame to be embarrassed to walk around Muskegon during the war without being in uniform. And sometimes there was nothing that could be done if they were deferred for some reason. And here's another pharaoh from that same family, I forgot. And another. Dick Feet, I knew really well through church and through the old newsboys. This is a member of our church, Dr. Fless, and his wife, Ruth Fless, who was a captain in the Army Nurse Corps. You might have heard of Fedrosi's Auto Parts. Your uncle, right? Yeah, this is Joe Fedrosi here, and this is his uncle from the war. Bud Fogg was somebody who was a very regular visitor at Mr. Quick. He didn't say much, but when he did say something, we all listened. And his brother, Warren Fogg. Okay. This person's daughter is here tonight, right? Okay. And her brother. So again, it's the family, both having been in the military. Mike Fox, he was one of these people at the old men's club, and I'd run into him a lot. Somebody told me, you know, you should be hanging around with young people. They're more interesting. I said, no, these people are the ones who have done things and have had experiences. Al Froner, he was married to one of my high school classmates. Chuck Fuller told me what the Army Navy Armed Guard was to protect the merchant ships. And this is a family member of, in his family. Look how many ships this person served on during the war. 10 ships. He must have woke up every morning wondering, well, where am I now? That's not uncommon. Al Gailey is the person who owned and built the Mr. Quick. And I was lucky enough at the end of his life to bring him over, and we had Al Gailey Day. And he was there to reminisce with us. And this is his brother who was in the Army also. Ed Gates would be a regular too. He didn't say much. He never talked about all the things he did in the war, so I figured I'd better get this down so the museum will have a record of it. And this is his brother, William. H. Alfred George. I never did find out what that first H stands for. Sometimes people don't like their name, so they just use the initial. Marshall Gerling, again, he's one of the graduates of the high school. This is my teacher, and I met him in his later years, and he didn't remember me, but I remembered, yeah, you were the one who disciplined me. But he'd show us movies in the all-purpose room at Laketon, and the door with the windows in it overlooked the gym where the girls were playing basketball. I wasn't watching the movie, I was watching. So he banished me for a couple of weeks from gym class. Here's a man who lived in my neighborhood. I met him a few times. He had antique cars and was an interesting guy. But I'm always lucky when they have a picture of themselves in the service. I knew Horace Gillette, I knew his daughter, I knew her as a neighborhood friend, and he was a member of our church. Joe Gilmore, what an interesting life he had. He would be a passenger in an airplane with a camera, and he would be flying over the enemy positions, very low. Very dangerous job. And fortunately, he had all those pictures that he kept after the war. This man's son is, I think, living in North Muskegon now, Girdler, Louis Girdler. Isn't that a beautiful picture? It's a painting. And he had that in the nursing home where he lived, just down the street a little bit. And I said, well, that is wonderful. So he was glad that I took a picture of it. He was one of the Red Arrow division. Joe Gonzalez, met him at his home a number of times, and he was glad to provide this picture. This is a man who visited us at Mr. Quick very often, Bob Gordon. I knew his dad was in the war, but he never lived around here, so I'm just showing you Bob's picture. He passed away, Bob did, just a few years ago at a relatively young age. We were sorry to see him go. Goose Goslin, Arthur Goslin. I never met him, but I called him on the phone and he was very cooperative. His son gave me that picture of his parents, and he told me all the details. I went through and I checked every detail and got it right. So I didn't always meet the people in person. Jim Gosward I certainly met. He was a member of our church and also a regular visitor at Mr. Quick. This is my uncle by marriage. He was a BAR man, a Browning automatic rifle. And I never knew anything about that until I learned later that those people had a very short lifespan sometimes, because an automatic rifle makes such a loud, characteristic noise that the Germans would be able to focus in on it right away. And yes, he got wounded, but he lived to be an old man. Jim Grimard, related to the Grimards from North Muskegon High School. This is a distant cousin of mine. I never met him, but we have Griswolds in our family. Richard, he's my second cousin. And Bob Griswold, I never got a chance to meet him either. Sometimes you don't know your second cousins as well as you know your first cousins. Donald Gunn, World War II. And his son is still living. Wetkin, a name that I'm not very familiar with, but it seems to hang around North Muskegon quite a bit. Bobby Hall. Anybody ever hear of him? If you went to North Muskegon High School, he was your teacher, guaranteed. And I knew him in his later years, and when we were over in Iraq, he had his opinions and he didn't bother or didn't mind sharing. He had a state of mind that he knew what was best and he didn't mind telling you. He was a great man. County commissioner, he has a building named after him. He was the mayor of North Muskegon. Jimmy Hamilton is the younger brother of my high school classmate, Ron Hamilton, both serving in the military long after the war, World War II. And here's a very good picture of a man whose name is on the list out there. This man's daughter is married to my nephew, so he's more or less a distant part of my family. His brother, I had a good long meeting with his brother who got the Silver Star Medal, and he was on Byes Road, and he's passed away now, of course. And his other brother who served in Lakeland Bethel Church as one of the deacons. Gus Hine. Anybody ever heard of Emil Hine? Well, this is his brother, married to my second cousin, and he served in the war. His brother Emil Hines was a wonderful mechanic, but during the war he stashed away a lot of tires. got in trouble with the government, so they arrested him. And they put him in the, not the jail, but they made him be a mechanic repairing our American vehicles. And that was the perfect thing for Emil to do. And this is his brother. Heckema, Bill Heckema, I think is the brother of Al Heckema. I don't have Al's picture here. Here's another one from the list. Don't know much about some of these people. This man is here tonight. Charlie, where are you? Well, Chuck, we'll be seeing him on Friday too. Military police. So you had some people who gave you some trouble once in a while?
Oh, very seldom.
Yeah.
Everybody was fine.
We need our own soldiers to watch over our other soldiers who maybe get a little drink once in a while. Harry Hewitt and my friend Ted Hewitt, his nephew, who's living right now in the area. Tracy is here tonight. Tracy not only had 3 brothers in the military, but he had 2 sons in the military. So, and I know anybody that has anything to do with Reese Puffer School District knows the name Hickman. I think everybody had a Hickman in their class. William Roy Hill is the father of my friend from school, Bill Hill. And I never met the older man, but I remember Bill really well.
He was
George
also,
Hilt
he was
is
also
the...
a BAR man too. Hill was.
Pardon me?
He was also a BAR man.
Oh,
That
okay.
heavy rifle you talked about?
Yep.
Yep.
But you know the Hilt family because of the Hilt building and the Hilt legacy and John Hilt. And this is John's uncle. John's father did not serve in the war, but his uncle did, and that's where this picture came from. Hoffman, again, Laketon Bethel Church, and a good friend of our family. Hogenstein, Don Hogenstein was in my class of 63. His father had the same name, but he was serving in the military during the war. Ken Hooker, a member of our church who was also in the war. Phil Hoos and Robert Hopka. He lived until very recently in North Muskegon. And I would sometimes see him at the store and we'd talk a little bit. This is my good friend from years ago, Henry Hopkins, who didn't quite make it into the action of the war because when he was on his way to the Pacific, the atomic bombs went off and that was it. This comes from a person who is still around. I know his brother Jerry, who gave me that picture, Jerry Hopma. This is Jerry's father, Otto Hopma. I met him a couple times, and he, like many of them, had a lot of advice and things to say. This man never came back from North Muskegon from the war. He was killed in Germany. He's buried in Muskegon. This is his brother, who gave me the picture, Warren Hornis. Frank Hovey was a North Muskegon fellow. I can't remember what his profession was, but he's well known at North Muskegon. Martin Heisinger I met at the nursing home right near the end of his life. I was so busy for a few years, I would sometimes and quite often have a meeting with 4 different World War II veterans in one day. And it was really hopeless because you can't give somebody your full attention. This is my cousin I never knew, and I ever did a picture of him in his uniform, but he was a state policeman, so that will do. Lauren Huntoon, very nice picture of, I met somebody in his family. I wish I could remember all the details, but remember, this is 430 out of 14,000. Okay, Donald Hutchins and his brother Warren Hutchins, who was a tank driver during the war. This is without a doubt the highest ranking person who ever graduated from North Muskegon. John, I think it was in the class of 64 or 5, and he ended his career after many years as a rear admiral. You can't go any higher than that.
Sure can.
There's our teacher, Ron Jansen, my driver training teacher. I remember him saying, "You get one more shot at this parallel parking. If you don't do it, boy, pressure." But what a nice man. I knew him in later years. Here's another one of the Red Arrow boys, Stan Yastrzemski. At first he said, nah, I've had enough of that. But then he became a really good friend. I visited with him many times. Here's a man who lives just off of Memorial Drive, and he was a member of our group for a while, but hadn't seen him in a while. Ken Johnson, I believe, was a dentist, lived on Rudderman. I think he's passed away. With a name like Johnson, you kind of lose track. You can't figure out which Johnson is which. This is a member of our church that I knew really well and was lucky enough to meet him before he passed away. Lyman Elmer Johnson, I can't remember the details there, but he was a North Muskegon man. Here is my brother-in-law, Bob Laverne Johnson, who stole my sister away when I was only 5 years old. And he had already gotten his letter, greetings from the government. He knew he was going in 1950. Well, that's when the Korean War started. He never told my sister until the marriage was already started. He was afraid she would change her mind. Well, she never did. They had well over 60 years together. And I loved my brother-in-law. David Joldersma graduated from North Muskegon High School. Jack Joslin and his brother Gene Joslin were both in the service at the same time, and they have relatives still living. Were you ever counseled by John Joseph? In the later years, I would run into him in the Kroger store, and we'd have a chance to talk. And he was such a jolly fellow. Ray Caber lived on my road, and he was a member of our church, a deacon, and a very nice gentleman. This man, I believe, had a son who was our janitor at North Muskegon High School. But the older Art Colley never came home from the war. There's George Keith, whose daughter is here tonight. And I've got to tell you something about his wife, Rosemary. First, I'll mention his son, Ron Keith, who served in the Army during the Vietnam War. The lady right in the middle is Rosemary Keith. She was a riveter. She was living on Mills Avenue, 99 years old. She didn't quite make it to 100. And she was Rosie the Riveter. No kidding. Richard Keith, I don't remember too much about him, except he's a North Muskegon man. Now this is an older man. Russ Kelly had a tree service in the area, and he would be always dressing up in his uniform on one particular day for his church every year. And this is his father, who had been long passed away in the past. So it's one generation to the next. Ed Kendall is a member of our church, Lake and Bethel. Scotty Kennedy could not talk. He had lost his voice, but he sure got the message across to me in a number of ways at the nursing home. And I realized he was a nice fellow, but just couldn't get the words out. Anybody remember Robert Kirshner, policeman in North Muskegon? Well, he had quite a career during the war in the Marines. Joe Klecka was one of the originators of the Don Ray VFW post. Paul Knoll died in the tragedy of the USS Indianapolis, which you may have heard of. He was one of them who survived right to the end when they were dropping the rafts, and he was swimming toward the raft when the shark got there. And he was a Muskegon person. The picture was given to me by the lady who got the Chronicle. He was a Chronicle boy at the time. Here's a distant cousin of mine I never knew, Frank Kaler. And his relative was a closer relative of mine from the Red Arrow Division, Neil Kaler. Here's a man I just met in the store. And again, I asked him the questions. So we had our interview right there, and he said, no, I don't have any pictures, so just go ahead and take my picture. The Kuban family, well known in the area, immigrants from Germany. Charles Kuban, Ken Kuban. The Laird family, Jack Laird, Robert Laird, and I met his widow. That's how I got that picture. And Bill Laird. So again, it's a family of veterans. Here's a member from our church, Lakeland Bethel Church, Chuck Landon. Gordon Lang, I had some good visits with him. One of my high school classmates who is no longer with us, he had a heart transplant, and that's the only picture I could find of him. Here's a North Muskegon High School graduate who was killed. He was a hospital corpsman, which would be a medic. And he was trying to help somebody, and well, he didn't make it. He was only 20. Charles Larder, a well-known North Muskegon person. Wilbert Lawbeck, and other members of his family. I wish I could remember all these details, but the museum has it all down. And my computer has it too. I met Joe Lehan before he passed away, and that picture is just perfect because that was his job in the war. He was a photographer, lived on Giles Road. This lady died before her husband did. Her husband lived on Bear Lake Road, Doug Laybourne, but I never met him. This fellow I just met in the store one day. And he said, yes, I'm a World War II veteran, come on over. So he had this nice picture. And this one is one of the ones from the list. So many of them I just have because their names on the list. Harvey Lloyd was one of our old Farts Club members and always had things to talk about. Here's a lady I did meet before she passed away. She was in the Navy. She was a wave. This is one of my high school classmates who lives a great distance away, but he was able to send me the picture and all of his information. Tom March, not a good picture, but I do remember him as a member of our church. Phil Margulies was an MCC instructor, and sometimes I would avoid him in the store because have you ever had somebody you can't get away from? Yeah, I guess he was always a teacher, even after he retired. But a nice fellow, that's for sure. Robert Marine, he lived a long life and had a lot to tell me. William Bastian Brook, he lived at the I don't know what they call it now, but the nursing home right there at Four Corners, not Four Corners, right by Mr. Quick. And he would sometimes come over and talk to us. Bill Madison I knew from church. Theodore J. Mosseth. I met him, but his son, Ted Mosseth, is my friend from high school. And his father refused to tell him anything about the war. Some of them were completely tight-lipped. I was in the war, that's it. Here's a barber that some of you may have had your hair cut by. He was one of our people at Mr. Quick. Here's a man who lives in North Muskegon, and just got his picture a few weeks ago and all of his information. This is a man from Dalton, who's long gone. Another Dabney, I didn't have any connection with him, but his family was able to get with me. This is my uncle who just died at 97 in Arizona just last year. The last one of my relatives from the war who was still living. This is my Uncle Pete who died a few years earlier. My cousin Bob Meal, first cousin, and his job was disarming bombs after the war. They had to take the bombs apart so that they wouldn't be dangerous anymore. My cousin Walt Meal, there were a lot of meals in the war. Billy Mingle, I just met him by accident, and he was very happy to have me come over and visit, and I said, "You got a great smile there, Billy." Bob Merkel is a high school classmate of mine, and we might be seeing him tomorrow. Jack Moore lives a very short distance from here, and he's a World War II veteran. You see, it says 1946. Truman said, if you're in any time during 46, you are a World War II veteran. And that does make sense, because some of them were killed. See, the war was over, but the killing wasn't over. Robert Morehouse. I knew her because she was a neighbor of mine, and she was also, you'd call her Rosie the Riveter. Her job was in a defense plant where they made bombs, 500-pound bombs, and she ran a forklift. Wow. And she said, one day I dropped one. She didn't realize it wasn't armed yet. She thought the whole place was going to go up. Lyle Morphew is still living. I see him once in a while at Myers, and we exchange a few nice words. Bob Morris, who taught math at North Muskegon High School. This is him in his Navy uniform. Okay, this is the second team, 1942. Just a little different. They had a different coach named Paul Moyes, over on the right. Mostly the same kids. But they let one team score one touchdown. They never lost a game, but they were scored upon one time. Broke their heart. This is Paul Moyes, who was a teacher and coach at North Muskegon. And there's his little boy. Ever heard of Jim Moyes? Did you listen to him on the radio announcing the games on Friday nights? Well, Jim Moyes is still living, and maybe you went to his restaurant, Bear Lake Tavern, years ago. He's all dressed up in his Navy uniform. This is my next door neighbor, Bob Mudgett. I met him later on, and he made a good story about what he did during the war, trying to get fuel to Patton so that his tanks would be working. There's a relative of Jerry Mulder here tonight, and that little girl is not here, but I met Doris, his wife, and Mr. Quick, and I said, next time I see you here, I'll get this picture to you. Well, I never saw her there again. This is my Uncle George. He served over in Germany, and he had some stories to tell, and he had a Luger also. This is my Uncle Jim Mullally. I don't know if you ever heard of Jim and May Mullally, but you've heard of Mullally Park. He was a World War I veteran at the Mexican border. We were having trouble at the southern border 100 years ago. And they donated 20 acres of land in 1963 for Mullally Park. Now everybody can pronounce my name. Here's Gary Mumford from North Muskegon High School. Here's one of my high school friends, and he's passed away, Larry Myers. Dick Nagelkirk is in our class, he's still living, and he's provided all of his information. Now, as you're seeing these, maybe you're thinking, hey, I've got a picture of my son in his Army uniform. Call me. I don't call anybody. Nobody answers the phone anymore, but if they call me, I'll talk to them. This is the father of one of my high school classmates who passed away recently. Well, he was gone a long time ago. This is a man who, of course, came to Mr. Quick, and he always had cookies. And, of course, he had stories to tell, too. Mr. Newkirk had some type of store in Muskegon. Electronics or electric, I'm not sure. Some of you know. Here's a lady I met before she passed away. She was blind, and she didn't look quite that handsome at that point, but she was a nice lady, and she was able to give me that beautiful picture. Here's another Gwatkin from North Muskegon. I think that was a well-known name back then. Nyblade. There were, I think, 4 Nyblade brothers who were in the war, but this is the one I remember from North Muskegon. And Richard Nyhoff, I met him. Russell Olson, again, at the nursing home. They used to let me come into the nursing homes before COVID, but that ended that. Jerry is still living. He says, I was born the same year as Queen Elizabeth. So, you know, he's getting up there in years now. Here's my uncle, who was in World War I, Oscar Olson. This is his son, who is living. He's 85 years old, and he was in the Marines. So again, it was 2 in the same family. Rose Olson, I only knew her in her later years. She was very happy to have her picture go into the museum. Ralph Osborne, I can't tell you much about him except he's a North Muskegon person. Don Oudzema was in our church, and he and his brother had a store just down the road a little bit years ago. And there's his brother Dick Oudzema. They were co-owners of the store, grocery store. I had a friend in high school whose father, Richard Overcamp, was in the war, and somehow the picture got to me. Ellis Pender, he was long gone, but the picture remains. The lady on the right was the second wife of Dr. Verschuren. And so her name at that time was Peterson, and her children are named Peterson. 2 brothers, one was a sheriff's department and one is a veterinarian, and she's passed away too now. But I just saw the son the other day. Okay, this is a distant relative of mine. I met Ted Plank several times, and he had stories to tell about what he did in the Navy. There's so many different kinds of work people did. This is one of the boys from that team, the team that never lost. And Robert Postema was a relative, but I didn't get any good picture of him. Here's that lady from our church, Maid. my wife's wedding dress for $25. Those days are gone. It was a beautiful dress, but that's about the price back then. Oh, how do you get in there? Okay, L.G. Puffer from this area. He was related to other puffers that I knew. There's one. I didn't know these people, but I knew the family. And Dwayne Pulsifer, Raymond Race from Layton Township. I met him, but we didn't have much to talk about, and he was a dentist in North Muskegon. Wendell Reset, his son, was also a dentist. Robert Radix. And if you see any picture here that you want, contact me. I will email it to you. I'm not going to drive to your house if you're in Grand Rapids or something, but I will email any picture you see here to you. There's a friend who will be here at Russ's with us on Friday, John Rademacher. This is Don Ray. He's the man who died trying to help somebody, and that led to the Don Ray VFW post. And this is a relative who lived long after him. He was in the Navy after the war. This is Don Ray's wife, Joyce Ray. When Don was killed over there in New Guinea, she joined the Army Air Corps. She was that dedicated. Erwin Reiths. Melvin Reynolds has a relative here tonight. Melvin had a trucking company on Fenner Road, I believe. And I met Mel before he passed away, and he gave me some information, but I didn't get very much from him. This is a father of one of my high school friends. And George Richards had 5 brothers in the war, but none of them lived in this area. But he did, so I have his picture. This is Don Ritter from our church. He was also part of the Red Arrow Division. Friend of my high school classmate who lived right in my neighborhood. I got to know him and his wife, and of course Jim, the son. I bought vegetables from Norm Robinson on Giles Road. Every summer he'd have this big garden, and I'd stop with my Model A, and he'd really like that. And I looked around and I always bought something from him. That's one of his hobbies after the war. I don't remember much about him, but again, it's a North Muskegon person. This man was one of the early hockey players in Muskegon, and I met his son and his widow in North Muskegon, and Rogoski, it's a name that stands out. Here's one of our old people's group who has passed away, but before he did pass away, he gave me his picture and he showed me his DD-214, so we have all of that. And again, I'm a blank on some of these, but they are North Muskegon people. Maybe there's somebody that you remember. Art Rude was a lawyer in North Muskegon, and I met him and his wife. They're both gone now. But I also met his brother Bill for a long time. He was a regular, and boy did he have the stories to tell. Sometimes we think that the veterans of the war don't want to talk about it. Well, that's not always true. And he was also somebody who would come to the Mr. Quick and share his information. Henry Reike, the person who started the Reike Bakery. I gave that picture to them recently and they put it up on the wall. Richard Samuelson, he disappeared after the war. I don't know if anybody ever figured out what happened to him. Another mystery. This is the father of one of my high school classmates, Mary Sarka. Ray Shaner, I can't say much about him. Rick Shane Halls was in my class and also was on the school board, North Muskegon School Board. Paul Shapka, he just lived on Rudderman a while ago. Met him in his later years. His brother Vasil Shapka, again, here's somebody in the Navy who went from ship to ship. And it wasn't because he got in trouble, no. He had a special talent that was useful from one ship to the next. So he would be training his replacements. Frederick Shaw, Albert Schmidt. There were several Schmidts in North Muskegon High School during the war. And Frederick was one of the brothers. I met her, but he had already passed on. Now, isn't that a perfect picture of the war? That shows you the sacrifices that these people made. Beaver Samayan, not a good picture, but it's all there was. One of the ladies in our church had been married to Beaver, and she knew that much, but there was no really good picture. Now, this man lives right here in North Muskegon, and this is a picture that just came up recently of a Vietnam veteran. I think he was about in the class of '64, but I'm not real sure on that. I'll have to look him up. This is my first employer. He had a trucking company, and he hired me to wash his trucks, and I thought it was an honor. You ever try to wash a truck? Covered with dirt and mud, but I got to wash his brand new 1963 Chevy and drive it back to his house. That was a thrill for a kid. Okay, Richard Sheehy, he was on 3 different submarines, 4 different. It takes a special person to be on a submarine. This is a friend of mine who I knew for years as a church member. I knew his family. Same thing with Harold Sitzema. His wife provided that picture for me. It was a dancing studio, Sika Dancing Studio, very close to Hobo's Tavern, across the road. Well, this is Buddy, who already was involved in such entertainment things at the time he was in the war. His wife just died maybe a month ago. Another one of the dream team, the football players, they're all gone now. And his brother from Twin Lake. Another person with the name Simonelli. I've met this fellow many times while he was still active, and he'd always be kidding me in a nice way, always getting a little dig here and there, but I knew he was really a nice fellow. Richard Smith died in the war. He was a graduate of North Muskegon High School. And Thomas Snyder also died. He, at the time he died, again, North Muskegon, he was the farthest American soldier toward Germany. He didn't get into Germany yet, but he was the closest one to Germany. He was crossing a bridge, and that was the end for him. Oh, Anybody remember Frank Sedini? Anybody get their haircut? He gave me my first real haircut. Well, my mother cut my hair till I was 14. When I went to Frank and I found out that that was more interesting. And his brother Pete cut hair too. And I always told the guys who were sitting there, don't ask Pete any questions while he's cutting my hair, because he can't do two things at once. What nice people. And the Sedini I never knew, their brother Renato. Never heard of him until somebody in the family gave me his army picture. Here's one of the people who used to come to our group. He's about 78 years old, Kip. And Harvey Speed from North Muskegon High School. The Stafford brothers, Arnie Stafford, Herb Stafford. He ran a service station, and now we still have Stafford Towing from that same family. They have this picture up on their wall because he was the originator of Stafford Towing. And their brother Nate Stafford. Tom Stafford, real nice fellow from the church, and I knew him through the years and always had a good time with him. This person graduated North Muskegon. He died. He was killed in France. And there are many of these killed in action people in the high school at the Military Wall of Honor. And all you have to do is just walk in the door, and there it is. Mostly pictures of the ones who were killed from North Muskegon, but a whole lot of names too of people that you knew. Bob Sterrett, he was from this area, but I got to know him in Twin Lake. The Stibbets brothers. You ever heard of Stibbets Farms?
Yes.
Well, there were 5, I think. No, 6. 6 Stibbets brothers. The Red Arrow Division, the Armored Division in Europe, Harold Stibbets, Jim Stibbets. That's the one I knew. They were all deceased except Ken, and I met with him so many times at his house and then also in the nursing home. And he told me all about his brothers. This is the person who runs the Stibbets Farms today. He's the son of William Stibbets. And that's William and his wife, who were, he was in the war. I met this man a few times and got several pictures of him. This is my next door neighbor who was wounded in the war. And one time we kids were talking to him and he said, "Watch this." He was wearing shorts and he took a pin and he stuck it right in his leg. Couldn't feel it. That's where he had gotten wounded. He was lucky to get back alive. And here he's receiving the Silver Star Medal. Bud Swingston, not a good picture, but he was a member of our Model A club, and at least I've got that much. I never met this man, but I've been told that he was a regular at Mr. Quick. I met her at the end of her life, and she had this beautiful picture of her as a wave. Virgil Temple. We have a relative in the audience tonight of Virgil. This is a father-in-law of somebody here today. Great picture. John Teebybaum, teacher at MCC, and a very dignified man. He lived on Oakmere, North Muskegon. I visited him and his wife several times, and he told me what the graves registration is. Those are the people who find the bodies or the parts of bodies and do everything they can to identified the remains. And learned a lot from him. And I'm sure a lot of students at the JC learned from him too. This picture, I never met this lady, but she was still living, but I kept meeting her sister. This lady was losing her memory, and I always told her sister, make sure you tell her, Joyce, she's the most beautiful veteran picture I have. And she liked that. And that's her husband. They both lived in North Muskegon area. This is a brother of my uncle. I never met him, but I met his son. So he's not really a relative, but a good picture of him. And this man I met at the Park Meadows trailer park. Very happy person, always good to talk to. This is my first cousin, Larry Thompson, who has now passed away. He was a Vietnam veteran, and like so many of them, he was not treated with respect when he came home. This is his dad, my uncle, and my aunt Doris, and he was on Saipan, and he had memories that he could never shake. And so many of them. Yeah. Edgar Thornton lived in North Muskegon. He's in the yearbooks. William Thurkettle. In his later years, he was a stock car driver. He lived a long life, but he was on the Indianapolis also. He was in the water for 5 days, and he survived. That other man I told you about didn't. This is a high school student, Ted Torgerson, and when you read about what he did as a helicopter pilot, it's really just amazing. A member of our church. I don't remember him as a person, but I remember his wife. Harold Tucker lived on Memorial Drive, and I said to his wife, I don't know if we should use this picture. It's kind of pornographic, isn't it? And she said, use it. So I did. Another high school classmate of mine, class of '63, just got this picture the other day. Your brother Art. He graduated from North Muskegon, and he died within the last year. Correct?
Just about 1 year.
Yeah. Class of '59. Another one of the dream team. I was lucky to meet many of them, and they told me about what it was like to be on a team that never got scored upon. Oh, this man, met him at the nursing home, and he said, well, yes, I was in the war. I was just in the Merchant Marine. I didn't do anything. You shouldn't include me. He spent the whole war on the Great Lakes, on ships bringing iron ore to the refineries. And I said, what would we have done without you? So there he is, an example of the Merchant Marine. Fred Vanderlaan. We have his daughter here somewhere. Okay, yeah, right. Andrew Vanderlyn, relative? Okay, what's the relation?
He's my uncle.
Uncle, okay, all right. Another high school classmate who served during the Vietnam War, but served in Alaska. There was stuff going on everywhere. This is my Sunday school teacher and father of my good friend Dave Vanderwall from back at that time. Charles Vanderway, right now I don't remember the connection, but there is a connection, and it's all recorded in the museum. Somebody took Henry Van Dunkler's picture tonight, some relative or friend. Here's a high school classmate of mine, class of '63. And I visited him a couple of years ago, and I said, Jim, would you happen to have a picture of yourself in your Army uniform? I know you were in the Army. And here it is, hanging on his wall.
Who is it?
So I got it down, took a picture of it.
Who is it?
Oh, the name, Jim Bellama. Yeah, sometimes the picture doesn't completely show up. James Bento from World War II, from North Muskegon High School. There's his brother Ted. You see, most of them were handsome, weren't they? And there is the veterinarian, Doc Verschuren, in uniform. Roger Voss, another member of our Lake and Bethel Church. Shaw Walker, does that sound familiar? You could look into the Muskegon history and find out the connection of this man with the factory, Shaw Walker. Okay, Fred Walters Jr. Bob Walters, who is living today, 78 years old. He was in during the Vietnam era. Roy Walters, these are all brothers. Stan Wade. I remember one time I was giving a talk and he said, what about us veterans? We went in 46. And I said, yes, you are a World War II veteran, even though people might not believe you. Anybody in 46 was classified as a World War II
I
veteran.
think his son just died.
Harold Wagner from our church. I knew him as an older man, but didn't know about this until I talked to his son. Dan Weichel. I just sent a get well card to Dan. He's in assisted living center for rehabilitation for the next couple weeks. A place many of us would not want to go, but Dan has some problems right now. But he is really instrumental in the bringing of the LST ship to Muskegon, and he still works with it. Not as much as he used to because he's starting to fail, but he did over 1,000 parachute jumps. How many have you done? Most people wouldn't think of doing that, over 1,000. This is Bob Weissert, class of '61. His daughter is my daughter-in-law. And I told her a few years ago, finally I have a daughter. You remember that first West Coast station? He's the one who started it. Look how it's grown. Tom Wiggins, a relative of my childhood friend. Virgil Wilkes. He repaired my Model A equipment, and he enjoyed doing it. I said, if you enjoy it so much, why don't you just do it for free? Paul Wilson. Okay. Who's the relative of? Okay, yeah. No, he's your uncle? Okay. So Ruth was Ruth Wilson Baker.
Well, there's a story with that Ruth. Difference in parents.
Andrew Wisniewski, the father of my high school classmate. James Wolfus. I met both of them. They were both getting on in years, and I would meet him at, well, you meet people everywhere. His particular fun thing to do was go to Brooklyn Bagels. He had two younger friends, probably in their 60s at the time, who would always take him there and bring him back. And I got to know him there. Orville Woodring. There were, I think, 4 or 5 Woodring brothers in the war. There's my teacher, 8th grade teacher at Lincoln Central, Gene Wern, Mr. Wern we called him. Al Zart, maybe Al sold you a car. He sold me one from Matson Oldsmobile. Don Zart, his brother.